Welcome to the Alternative Assets Podcast. This is not another podcast about the stock market. Instead, we focus on the rapidly evolving world of alts. The goal of this podcast is to provide original research and insights that empowers you to become a better alternative investor. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining. Now let's dive in. Opinions expressed on this podcast by the hosts and podcast guests are for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Podcast hosts and guests may maintain positions in the offerings discussed in this podcast.
All right. Hey, everyone. We are here with Brian and Chase, the co-founders of Commonwealth. Commonwealth has created a new ownership model for horse racing. What used to cost about $10,000 now has an entry point of just $50 per share. That's right, you can buy shares of actual racehorses, and it's all done through their mobile app. You share in the horse's earnings, and you get other cool benefits over time, like stable visits and a whole bunch of cool stuff. We first profiled Commonwealth back in May of this year, and since then, they've had a ton of growth. A ton of stuff has changed, and we really look forward to hearing all about it. Today on the podcast, I've got myself, and we've got our new podcaster, Horacio Ruiz. He's been an analyst for alternative assets for the past 2 months, and this is his first podcast, and he's super excited to join and to be the jockey on this podcast. So welcome, everyone, and Horacio, take it away, man.
Thanks, Stefan. So good to do this. Really happy with Commonwealth, and because it's one of the things I've always loved watching is horse racing. The big Triple Crown races were like must watch when I was growing up, and just this idea of being able to own a part of a horse was like so interesting. I just want to thank Brian and Chase for being here with us and to talk about their company a little bit. Basically, just want to get started. Like, how did you guys come up with this idea of fractionalizing racehorses?
Yeah, it's the question we get a lot.
Yeah.
You asked, how did we meet? And that's kind of funny in itself. We actually grew up in the same town. I'm a little bit older than Chase, but we're both from a small town in West Michigan. And I was very close friends with Chase's older sister. So we've known each other for a really long time. And this was kind of the first opportunity we had to work together or hook up on something. But going back to kind of the genesis of Commonwealth, it's back in 2018. I mean, my background is all in kind of emerging business models and startups and growth phase companies, things like that. So really what I do is just keep my ear to the ground on things I think are interesting or, applications of business models. And I'm a classic car guy. So Rally Road hit my radar in like 2018 when they had like 2 cars on the platform and we're just figuring it out. And I just fell in love with the business, this idea of passion investing. It was more than just a return. It was such a rich idea that I started thinking about how else we could apply it. And, there was a lot of obvious ones that would jump off the page, but horse racing just felt so natural for this business model. There's already a ton of syndicates. I think they own 60 to 70% of horses in the US anyway. Partnerships do. So it was just kind of everything sort of fit and was ripe. And I really didn't know a ton about horse racing. I'm a casual fan. I have been since like 2005 when I lived in Baltimore and went to the Preakness and all that stuff. But really, it was actually funny. Earlier that year, I was at Santa Anita for Easter, and Chase and I traded some Instagram messages because he saw I was there, and he's like, "We got to get you in the game." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I would have no idea what I'm doing." And then about 4 months later, I'm writing him going, "Hey, I actually have an idea for horse racing. I would love to hear your thoughts on." And the anecdote I always tell that I think is very flattering for Chase is that I send a lot of people business ideas. It's just kind of like what I do, it occupies my mind. And I sent Chase one of the longest and possibly most boring reads I've ever sent anybody. It was all SEC stuff, and I was telling him how this would work and all this. And he got back to me with a long list of questions like the next day, and he was like, "This is incredible. I want to talk to you about this." And yeah, I mean, from there it was, as you might expect, it was a lot of evenings, a lot of us just hammering it out, doing business model stuff. How does this work? All that. And now it's been what, Chase, I guess 2.5 years. And it has definitely been a journey that I don't think either of us could have predicted. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's for sure. Yeah. Brian always says that's flattering. And I'm always never quite sure if it's flattering or not. I jumped into some super dry stuff. But I will say there are very few businesses that would make me look through SEC documents with a particular level of excitement. So this one was special. And it was funny because, as these things kind of happen when you're working on a startup or any project that you care about and kind of throw yourself into, time becomes kind of immaterial. You forget how much time you spent on it. And I always go back. Brian reached out to me and I had just claimed my first racehorse a day before Justify won the Triple Crown. Justify won the last leg of the Triple Crown, the Belmont, which is in New York. It's the longest race of the Triple Crown and, the thing that kind of holds so many horses back. And the day before he won, I bought a filly that was by the same sire and out of a really nice mare. And so I snagged that filly and we had started to work her and we were planning on bringing her back to the racetrack. And that's when Brian slid into my DMs with this idea. So it was all just kind of, there was something kind of fateful about that year. And it's been pretty fun to date. Definitely more than I think Brian and I ever could have imagined. We spent a lot of time thinking through and analyzing and peeling the layers, the incredible layers that are horse racing. And yet we have continued to be surprised and excited. So yeah, it's pretty fun to look back on that stuff.
Yeah. So is it fair to say then that, Brian, you're kind of like I don't want to say behind the scenes guy, but you're kind of doing the legal stuff and all a lot of the paperwork maybe. And Chase, you're kind of more of like, if you can delve a little bit into your background about with horses and how long you've been involved with horses and kind of like a perfect marriage, right? Where, or a partnership, I should say, where Brian comes in with this, this idea with horse racing and who better than you who've been involved with horse racing, practically all your life.
Well, I would say it is funny that you said marriage. Brian and I always tease each other and Brian's wife teases me too. It is kind of like a marriage, for better or for worse. But no, it is that way. And it really is there's an incredible kind of symbiosis that Brian and I have. One thing that, Brian has brought tons of incredible things to this partnership. We really do have, this great kind of complementary set of skills. I'll let Brian speak to his background, which is definitely far more than, kind of paper pushing and legal regulatory kind of side of things. So my background is, first and foremost, I'm a horseman. I started riding horses when I was 4 years old. And every year after that, just saw a kind of escalation of commitment to equestrian sports. My parents probably would have liked it. I grew up playing travel basketball, soccer, tennis, and all those sports started to kind of drop off. And every year the horse commitments got more and more. I think my parents would have preferred soccer and basketball. It's like, hey, we got you some cleats. We got you a new ball. And instead it was like, you need a trailer, a saddle, and a couple horses. No problem, Mom and Dad. And so, yeah, it was one of those things. But what they say is it's like cowbell. The only solution for horses is more horses. So, once it came time to get serious about, professionally, I decided that I didn't want to let anybody own my passion. And so I went to school. Brian and I actually went to the same college in Michigan, Western Michigan University. I went for sales and business marketing and decided that, I have always loved the advertising side of the world and the creative side. And so I went into sales and found myself as a digital strategist for a number of years and got to work with some of the world's largest brands on digital campaigns, specifically around video. And we did a lot of educational campaigns and things like that. And I loved it. And I always say there's very few things that could have pulled me away from that job except for this one. And that's when Brian reached out. And this business has really allowed me to take my love for creative, for building community, for serving people, and my love for horses and bring those two things together. And so that's kind of my bend. And Brian, feel free to jump in and chat about yours.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, most of my career, going about kind of 15 to 17 years now, has been pretty deep in the tech and kind of VC communities of New York, San Francisco, and now I live in LA. And that kind of really ranges from the early kind of first 5-6 years of my career. I was in mergers and acquisitions. So we were selling companies, buying companies. For a period, I was at an advisory firm, and then I was at a company called IAC, which is a large digital media conglomerate, which at the time I was there, we owned Ticketmaster, Home Shopping Network, Lending Tree, Match.com, MEO. I mean, like the list just goes on and on. And so I was in their corporate strategy, and they had 80 to 100 businesses. And I was in their corporate strategy and M&A group, which was really responsible for helping all the different business units drive strategy. And in some cases, that meant acquiring companies, investing in companies, corporate partnerships, kind of deeper, longer term partnerships. And, that's really where I cut my teeth in emerging business models and startups and stuff like that. And then went to San Francisco and joined a mobile marketing company called Playhaven. I was the 5th employee, first non-technical employee, and really just broadly responsible for the entire business. And we grew that to a couple hundred employees. I joined pre-revenue, and we went to about 50 million a year in revenue. And at one time, our software, it's all used by mobile app developers, mostly games. So at one point, our software was natively baked into about 80% of the top 1,000 apps in the world. It was quite a wild ride. I mean, that was a 5-6 year stretch of, crazy growth, lots of fundraising. We ended up merging with another company. That was really where, I cut my teeth on running a company and managing large teams and, what it takes to go from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10 and then 10 to 50 and like that. All of those things, how they change, how they morph, from the very beginning to kind of scale, so to speak. After that, I was involved in a VR company called Modal VR that was actually founded by Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari, amongst Chuck E. Cheese, amongst a bunch of other businesses. And that was a ton of fun. I mean, we were a little bit too early in that particular case. That was probably 4 years ago. We had a pretty wild VR startup. I was there for a couple of years. And then as I was kind of cycling out of that, that brings you to 2018, where I was just kind of I loved the business model so much for so many different things. Yeah, so I'm kind of an end-to-end sort of, startup and growth stage executive. So that's really what I bring to the table here. It's a lot of, what I always like to say to Chase is, I kind of represent like the casual fan of the partnership. A lot of what we're doing with this tech, there's a lot of ways you can get into horse racing. Most of them are very expensive, but very, very, very few of them, in our opinion, we think one of them is intuitive and very easy and digital native and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's kind of a combo of like, the business expertise and the guidance there. And then like, hey, let's make sure that the casual fan and just the everyday guy and gal can just, goes, hey, I'll throw $200 at this horse. Let's see what this is about, instead of feeling intimidated by it, which I think is one of the things that keeps a lot of people from horse racing. They just look at it and they go cross-eyed. So anyway, we have definitely been a great partnership, and we do a lot of the like complementary roles and stuff. So it's been good. And now, it's nuts now. We got 8 horses, so I guess 7 now. And yeah, it feels like we're racing every weekend. I mean, Chase and I are like, what? Like, it's still just the two of us, we have yet to hire. And so we kind of look at each other. We're like, well, this is what we wanted, even though our hair's on fire like 8 days a week,
Yeah. I mean, how with that, you have this deep business background, right? And Chase, you had this, this life with digital marketing, and horses were in your background, but you still weren't involved in the business like you are now. What is your day-to-day like? And we're going to get into the company. I also want to get into, what you guys actually offer, but how have your lives changed, and what is it like to basically be running a stable of horses and then fractionalizing them? What are your day-to-day jobs? Yeah.
Mine, like for this period, there's definitely a lot of talks with lawyers, brokers, auditors. The SEC compliance like maze is just, it's such a time sink. So for the moment, that's where, well, not for this moment, I suppose, but, out of the year, there's a solid percentage that would be devoted to that. When we hire, that'll inevitably go to somebody else. And then other than that, it's a lot of it's strategy. We talk about horses a lot, of course. We are headed toward a fundraise. We've raised a little bit of capital. We're mostly bootstrapped. We've done a small seed. Of course, we've done our big partnership with WinStar, which we can get into, but, we are headed back toward a fundraise. So I've got, in particular, have my eyes on that. But, other things, like as an example, we talked to different track operators about getting live racing into our app, before too long, right? So like there's all kinds of stuff like that, that you wouldn't think of, but it's just, you're constantly exploring new products and new ideas and stuff. And for me, in terms of my day to day, I have another company. My wife's got a retail business and stuff. So like kind of business management and all that stuff is sort of what I do anyway. So this has just like made it go from like I was already maybe too busy to now I'm like extremely way too busy. So this is what I do for sport, I guess.
Yeah, and mine, I always like to say, for a role that is based in the stable, I've never found one that's so unstable. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's awesome. One of the things that's really fun is that a lot of my time is spent and has to be spent at the barn. So oftentimes, one thing that's really fun about the racehorse industry is that it starts really early. And so, on a day that I go to visit our horses, to do content, to create some updates for our users, and to really just check in with the training team too, because so much of this industry, so much of this business is about making sure that we're managing the talent that we have and we're pointing them to the place that they can be the most successful. Yeah, there's a lot of great racehorses that have been managed to greatness, right? What they lack in natural talent, the team has made up for with just great management strategies, making sure that they're paying attention to the rest of the landscape. And so much of that, like anything, it's about being present and being around and understanding what's happening and kind of keeping your ear to the grindstone and listening for, some signal on things like, man, I really hear that the 2-year-old division is light in California. And that's, for instance, that's a scenario that played out for us when we decided to acquire a filly to send out to California. And it worked out really well, by the way, because we've got a large user base in California that needed a horse. So anyway, I begin my mornings, we'll go down to the farm and sometimes we'll watch our horses work in the dark, especially now that the time change is happening here in the States that, we're starting to fall back. So one of our top colts, Country Grammar, is a multiple graded stakes winner and just an excellent colt. He's working in the mornings right now at about 7 a.m. when it's dark. So what I'm doing with him is I watch him go out and his rider's got a light, a little kind of node that sits on the side of his helmet. And so I watch that go around the track, the 1.25 mile track. And so that's how we're watching. We're starting to see, okay, we're seeing his fractions. We're watching that. We're hearing about how a horse is holding up to the rigors of training, maybe mentally, maybe physically, strategizing around that. And then, basically the morning is over by 9 a.m. with the racehorses. We get a full morning of works in by 9 a.m. And then it's moving on to community management, getting we've got several thousand users. We've got users in 14 countries, actually, I think now 16. We just added a new user from South Korea, our first user in South Korea, got them all over Europe, and then 49 states in the United States. And most of these people are beginners. So they've got a lot of questions, which is natural. That's what we invite into this thing. So as hard as we work to make it clear and make things meaningful, there's always something missing. So it's really important to us that we connect with the community to make sure that people feel like they understand what's going on and they feel connected to what's happening. And then, of course, Brian and I strategizing product. We're still early in this kind of product development. We love where our digital product's at now, but we also have, big plans for this platform and what we think that it can offer, casual fans and even lifers, right? So there's no shortage of activity. Part of it's horsing around, and the other part is kind of being chained to a desk and making sure that we're innovating and that we're serving our users, as quickly and as best we can.
Chase, great job with these puns, man. I've noticed at least a few horsing around. You're on the ball, man, really. One thing I learned that was interesting, I didn't realize you have users that are international. So the Commonwealth is open to anyone in the world. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we have a bunch of users from Australia and New Zealand, by the way. And we just added another, I think Sweden was the other country that we just added a user from. But we've got users all over the UK and Ireland, of course. We've got users in Dubai, Egypt. Yeah. So it's pretty fun. And I actually just had an email conversation with somebody in like rural Japan. And this guy, Hanjun Lee, he said, hey, look, I really want to do this, but I'm having a problem with my credit card because the local credit card company is not understanding this foreign transaction. And Brian and I are just like shaking our heads, laughing. We're like, this is so cool. Like, who knew we'd be trying to get this guy in rural Japan to be able to be, an owner of a racehorse here in the States. It's pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. And it just speaks to kind of like how far I guess your message is spread, right? And how you guys, how much of a reach you have, right? Potentially. you talked about managing a team, right? And looking at some of the horses, like in terms of the offerings, is it more than just picking out the right horse, or is it also kind of like being at the, the right place at the right time, and maybe having, that team, like you said, jockey, trainers? What is your philosophy behind choosing the horses and putting out a product out there that, that has that reach for people that are, wanting to join the site?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. The act of choosing a great racehorse it's a risky business. The difficulty of selecting a great racehorse can't be understated. And that's something that we're very clear about. Now, I will say that, we're very proud of our bloodstock team. And for those that aren't familiar with the word bloodstock agent is a lot like a sports agent. They're there to scout talent. And we truly have some of the best in the business. We have a female bloodstock agent that's been with us since the beginning. Her name's Marette Farrell. Marette actually trained and worked with a very famous Australian trainer named Gay Waterhouse. So Marette spent quite a bit of time in Australia. She's worked internationally. She's from Ireland, was an international athlete. She played lacrosse and field hockey, and she has an impeccable record and is, one of our top bloodstock agents. Then we also work through our strategic partnership with WinStar Farm. And WinStar has, selected horses like Justify, the Triple Crown winner, among lots of other, Breeders' Cup, kind of grade 1 winning, breeding stallions and mares. So we've got this really incredible team, but it really has to start with, the strategy has to begin with the question of where is it that you want to race and what are you trying to accomplish? It's not as simple as just saying, well, we're going to go buy as nice a horse as possible, because that's a bit limiting. And so, like I said before, if you want to win the Kentucky Derby, then basically what you're saying is we want to buy a colt or a male horse that can run 1.25 miles, right? And we are probably going to look at certain pedigrees, and we're going to look at a certain type of physical. And so you start to narrow down, because otherwise you're looking at thousands of horses, and it's kind of like getting a needle in a haystack. So as soon as you start to crystallize and solidify that strategy, it really starts to inform what you're looking for. So in this case, one of our most recent purchases, I Got a Gal, very special filly that we have racing in California. When we chose I Got a Gal, Marette Farrell picked her out, and we said, hey, we want a filly that can compete on the West Coast. The West Coast filly division was pretty light, and fillies can be very lucrative because it's much more likely that a filly or a female horse goes on to have a breeding career than it is a male. Sorry, fellas, if you were a racehorse, the chances are that you would never have a breeding career.
Why is that? I would think it's the opposite.
Yeah, so the fact is that, people are very selective about stallions. Probably 10, 20 years ago, if you won a graded stakes race, you could probably be a stallion if you had a decent pedigree, Now you really have to be the top of the top. You have to show incredible speed. You have to show incredible talent. You got to have a great pedigree. You got to look great. So basically what I'm saying is you got to look like an Instagram model. You got to have a LinkedIn profile that looks like, Bezos or Musk. And you also have to be, genetically special.
So the days of Seabiscuit are gone,
That's right. Well, the fact is, yeah. So what's interesting about it, though, is that when you can select those colts that are special, you get top dollar for them. And so when we choose a colt, that's really what we're playing for. We think of it like startup investing, right? There are going to be a lot of horses that don't make that. By the way, they can still be lucrative and they can still be a lot of fun. But if you can find a colt, you find a unicorn, typically speaking. So back to my comment about the filly. These fillies are more likely to go on to a breeding career. So even a filly with a middling career will have some residual value after her racing career. And, whether you sell her for $20, $30, $40, $50, even $100,000, you can, you might have a couple $100,000 filly that still goes on to sell for something. If you can get a graded stakes win, you could sell a filly for $500,000, $1 million plus very easily. And you see that happen a lot. So what we liked about this filly is we said, hey, because the division out in California is light, we get a special filly. We get some what we call black type on her. And we could probably have a pretty lucrative deal here and have a lot of fun doing it for our users in California. So that's kind of one of those strategies then you start to work from there to go, okay, we've got the pedigree that says it can do this. We've got a physical. So looking at her body, these clues kind of tell us, hey, she looks like she'll go long, or she looks fast. She looks like she'll be able to handle the rigors of training. And all of these inputs kind of come together. And in a different episode, we can really dive into those because there's a lot of them and they're interesting. But ultimately, we're taking that checklist and kind of working backwards to say, okay, yeah, this fits the profile. We think we have a spot for her. Now let's go execute on that. Make sure that we get her for the right price. One thing that we say in horse racing is we like to be disciplined and opportunistic. So it's very easy to go spend. There's a lot of billionaires in this sport, and you can let ego get the best of you. And so one thing that we love about our model is that we have a fiduciary duty to represent our clients and get them the best deals that we can and put forth something, that makes sense. And Brian and I are both very serious about that. And so you start to do that. And, we've seen it with our partners, WinStar. They're very conservative with their buys. They're aggressive, but they don't spend money to spend it. And what you see with that is you start to see that discipline pan out with, you get the right horse, the right trainer, the right landscape, the right kind of opportunity, and you see a lot of success that can happen.
It's funny you say that. I mean, in terms of being that fiduciary duty, right? Because in order for you to be successful, right, you need to put out the best possible product that you can. And I would imagine that with who your users are, or maybe who might be investing, putting in a couple $100s, they put a little bit of trust that, the experts are putting the best possible product that they can in front of me, right? Like, so all these fractional sites, whether they're, experts in wine or sports collectibles or whatever the case is, there's a certain level of trust that, hey, you're presenting to me something that should be, in essence, there's no guarantees, of course, but that I know you've done your research, you've done your work, and I feel comfortable investing in it. Have you gotten, I guess it's a two-pronged question. Have you gotten any sense of who it is that's currently investing on your platform? Are they, horse, aficionados, or is it kind of just some people that are interested in the platform?
No, we have an incredible user base. We have a lot of our user base trends younger. When I say younger, 30s to mid 40s. We've got plenty of people in the kind of 50s as well. But from some of our other cohort, we've seen a nice young user base, and we've got tons of casual fans. A lot of the people, we've just recently started to press into the horse community. And so we've kind of just started to trend away from like total beginner or total casual fan, people that are like, man, I've never done this. But one thing that I don't think that Brian and I have stressed enough that we're really proud of, and then I'll let Brian speak to kind of our business model a bit, but I think this is worth mentioning, is that when we set this business model up, because it's different than, the traditional alternative asset that is waiting on asset appreciation, we do have asset appreciation, in these racehorses. And it's actually something we're working on building into the product. If a racehorse goes on to win, racehorse valuations fluctuate like you can't believe. And we want a way to capture that. But the point that I was getting to is that we set up the business model so that we win and lose together. So alongside our users, Commonwealth can't exist just by selling horses. Our business model doesn't flourish just because we sell horses to people. And the thing that we said when we began this exercise in 2018 was, Brian said this perfectly, said, we should align interests. That was Brian's line that I've continued to steal, and I'll continue to keep doing it. But we wanted to align interests so that we could say with confidence, hey, not only are we confident in the horses that we're putting out, but we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to make sure that our business model is tied to your success. So I think that's really important, because this is different than, most the more traditional alternative assets, which is kind of a funny thing to say. But I do think that that's important and worth mentioning.
Just to add to that real quick, because it's a really interesting point. So there's no question that the big fractionalization platforms are putting out quality goods. That's not the issue. I think the issue sometimes comes with, how they value them, right? And what the market capitalization is on these alts. And it's a lot easier, I think, it's still difficult, but it's a lot easier to value, like a sports card versus value a horse. If you could kind of tell us a little bit about how you think about pricing and essentially valuation, I guess market capitalization of these horses. How much does each horse cost? Is it, how do you figure out what the share price is? How do you approach that?
Well, real quick, and I'll let Brian jump into how we start to, factor out share price and things. It's very clear, but I'll say this. It's not to say that we'll never buy horses in the private market, but in general, our horses come from public auctions, and horse racing has public auction data. So we can
so much data.
Yeah. And it's great. So we can point right to it and say, hey, look, this is where our market cap comes from. We bought the horse for $250,000. And that's what you are, that's how we're valuing the horse. And then Brian can get into how we actually break that down and stuff. But it's beautiful for us. And by the way, I want to say my comment was definitely not directed at alternative assets. It was more about, there are some private syndicates that they make a lot of money just by selling the horse. So whether the horse kind of does well or not, if they get the thing sold, they're going to make a lot of money.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the public auction data and the stud data, the breeding data and the racing data was actually one of the things that I loved about horse racing, is that you could just peel the thing apart. When you think about laying a platform over it, that's ideal. You have all this publicly available information. So it was actually one of the first kind of green lights that I got to kind of in my early process. But in terms of market cap and valuations and stuff, I mean, we try to lay it out fairly well in the app. I think Chase and I would both agree, like we could maybe do it a little better, and we're working on that, in our subsequent versions and stuff. But there are some kind of quirks to the thing. And the main one that I would point out is when you see the valuation of our offering, the conclusion might be you're valuing the horse at that only. And that's actually not fully correct. It is correct, but not fully correct. So within our offerings, we've basically got three buckets. We've got the horse acquisition costs. We've got 2 years of preloaded training costs, working capital, which goes into a bank account that is for that, that series, that horse, that offering only. And then, of course, we've got expenses and fees, which we try to center around like the 15 to 20%, including legal and just all that stuff. We try to get it all done for sub 20%. But, so when you invest, like for instance, Bico, our offering kind of values him right about $150,000. Well, the horse inside of that is valued at about $25,000 to $30,000. The working capital is, in this case, 75% of $120,000 because it's $60K a year. We actually do a little higher than that. Call it $75K a year of carrying cost for the entire horse. So then in Bico's case, we own 75%. So we multiply everything by 75. And so really what you're left with after your investment is not only the horse, but it's also 2 years of runway. So the comparison of investing in our offering versus going to the auction and buying a horse is not the same, even though some people, that when they come to us, they don't totally realize that. Because it would be like going auction price plus front loading all of these training costs. So I think of it more like we're pricing it at that valuation. It's basically a cost basis because it's the cost of the carrying costs and the cost of the horse. And so you're getting it at that number without ever having to put another dollar in. And we get basically 2 years of let's see what we can do with this thing, I guess, for the, lack of a better word, it's our shot. So, I think the short answer to the question is we let public auctions guide where we're at, and then we add costs if we have to, pre-offering, and then we layer in working capital. And then our fees we take 15% of the asset value, not the offering costs. Some of our competitors do 15% of total offering, which gets pretty spendy pretty fast, or not spendy. I think of it just as it's kind of a heavy load on the offering. And, we try to keep our total fees and expenses, including those that we pass on to lawyers, brokers, auditors, all that stuff. We try to keep our total below 15 or 20%. And ours typically shakes out to like 7 to 8%. It's 15 of the asset. The asset's usually 40 to 50%. Because we don't take 15% on the training costs. We don't take 15% on any of the fees or anything like that. So that's how it's all built up. And when you start talking about rates of return, it gets really interesting because it actually depends on when these things happen. And if we were to go, let's say, buy a 2-year-old and we front load let's say we're half, and so we front load like $80K of costs. That might be $100,000 offering, 150, let's say $1,000 offering. If it pops a couple early races and we get a crazy offer to sell the horse, which is not uncommon if you get a good 2-year-old, the return on that would just be ridiculous, because we would also be returning all of the training capital. So it would be like, well, we only got 6 months in, so you're going to get 75% of this training capital back, and we just 30x'd the value of the horse. Where if you were to do that exact same scenario, you 30x that horse, but you do it at the end of the 2 years, we have no training capital to give back because it took us to expending that. So we have these like multiple curves on our rate of return, which is not making it easy for me and us to like really clearly lay out, but it is a real dynamic. And I've been trying to tell people, especially kind of my friends that are really casual on this, is like, don't think of it like investing just in a horse. Think of it investing like an operating company that's going to go out and try to pull something off over the next couple of years.
But it's only for 2 years. That's the critical thing I'm trying to understand here. So to get really in the numbers, like we understand that you're baking 2 years worth of care and training costs directly into each offering. So, unlike syndicates, the investors don't have to worry about bills or fees or training or anything like that. But what happens after 2 years? That's critical, because that's an ongoing cost that you're not accounting for.
Well, the short answer is Commonwealth would eat anything, but what we would actually do, is we're going to do secondary offerings. So with about 6 to 12 months left, and if we really got deep on this, which I'm happy to do here since we can edit, if we really got deep on this, there's really only a handful of scenarios this happens. It feels like it's a more real scenario, but because 2 years isn't a super long window. First, within 2 years, most horsemen looking at Chase would tell you, you pretty much know what you got. So if we're at the end of 2 years, there's really kind of 3 scenarios. The horse has done well. In that case, we don't need to raise any money because the thing's just doing great. The horse is doing really not well. In that case, we're probably just going to try to move on and cut losses. We're not going to try to raise more money and keep banging our heads against the wall. And then you've got this kind of middle scenario, which is like the horse has done okay. There's things we like. And, the team gets some conviction around the horse, for whatever reason that may be. And in that scenario, 6 to 9 months out, it takes us 2 to 3 months to turn these things around, maybe less, when we get it really dialed in, call it 2 months. So, 6 to 9 months out, we would go, hey guys, like, we're either be forced to move on. We don't really want to do that. The team has a lot of conviction about this horse. And so we're proposing, in this case, it would only be training capital. So we don't have to buy the horse again, of course. So we would go, let's do another year, so that, then at that point we really know. And we shouldn't be going into the 4th year on a horse that isn't, panning out. That would seem really silly.
Real quick to that point, I just want to tell you guys a quick story to bring that scenario to life, just real fast. Our bloodstock agent, Moret, selected a horse for someone named Zypessa. Zypessa was a mare, and at 2 years old, she did nothing. At 3 years old, she was kind of slow going. She wasn't quite ready. She won like 2 little races and kind of came in last. They're like, but they had confidence that she needed to go a little bit longer. They're like, it's worth continuing to go. They bought this mare for $67,000. Okay. Going into her 4-year-old year, she won, I don't know, she raced probably 8 times, raced one more time. I think in the Breeders' Cup was her final race. She ended up earning $783,000. Now remember, to our point before, she would have come to kind of the end of her training capital, and it would have been that would have been the moment that we said, okay, no, we have conviction. And it's pretty clear when you have conviction, when you don't. Oftentimes you'll find this out and you'll know this before the 2 years is even close to being up. But they had conviction, they waited, they did it. She won $783,000. They bred her. So she ran in the Breeders' Cup on 11/4/2017. And they put her in the sale, and they no-sailed her for $925,000. threw a baby in her, and the next year they sold her for $1.25 million. So that's the kind of reason that you would have, the conviction that you would have to go, no, it's worth staying on. We see something here.
Yeah, those moments do happen. But to get kind of back to the mechanics of it, I mean, basically, if we get into that scenario where we go, hey, we still have this conviction about this horse, but the working capital is running out, we would do a secondary offering through the SEC of, call it, if we own half the horse, we'd add another year and we'd go, okay, that's $40K, for our 50%. And existing shareholders would have a right of first refusal. They don't technically legally, it's not in the documents, but that's how we're going to execute, and that's how we're going to do these. We're going to say, hey, you can, we believe in this horse. Here's the pitch. Here's the story. We would love to have you come in for your original amount, and if not, anything that doesn't get bought goes out to the general public, and maybe even back to the investors that did buy back in and say, hey, you can buy more if you'd like. And so just kind of shake it out that way. And that's really how we maintain that you'll never have to put another dollar in if you don't want to. There may be scenarios where more dollars are needed, but you will never be on the hook for having to put in. So
going to what Stefan was saying, so you got those 2 years baked in. What's the ideal scenario for an investor, right? They put in, say, $1,000 of worth of shares in. What would be the ideal scenario for an investor to kind of see, hey, this was good for me. This is a good return. Yeah. What would those 2 years of the horse's career look like?
It's a good question, honestly. And it's one that, we keep trying to nail down. Everybody's different. Some people come to this thinking returns. Some people come to this thinking experience and lifestyle. And, in reality, of course, it's some kind of a mix. But, if I was to answer that kind of on my own personal level, I would come to it with eyes wide open. And I would go, hey, there are like lottery type returns here, but it's not super common. And so, I would go into it going, hey, if this horse can give me X number of races, hopefully some wins, and, maybe make a little bit. I personally think of like, take me to different parts of the country. Like, I'm the guy that would go, my horse is going to race in Miami 3 times this winter. Like, give me a reason to fly to Miami and have fun with my friends. You know what I mean?
The Melbourne Cup is in a few days. Come on down to Australia. We'd love to have you.
We've always kicked it around, and Commonwealth will definitely take us to Australia in the Melbourne Cup. But this, unfortunately, is not the year.
Yeah, I mean, horse race culture here is so huge, and it's amazing, like actually how much bigger I think the horse race culture is in Australia, even compared to the US, which is pretty crazy. But
totally.
So, I think one of the things that I like what you guys are doing is, you're trying to bring together people through, the app, but you're doing more than that. You're trying to build like a community of, racehorse fans and aficionados alike, and you're setting up some things where the fractional owners can attend events. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that really brings everything to life for me. Really cool.
Absolutely. We said from the beginning we wanted to make sure, we thought that it was important that fans and users could have the Commonwealth experience regardless of where they live, because there's plenty of people that don't live near racetracks, right? And so we're working hard to make sure that the digital experience is kind of just as fun and exciting as the in-person experience. So if you don't live near a racetrack, what happens is, we'll talk race day, because that's really what all roads lead to race day. That's where everybody wants to be. That's where everybody wants to get. And, the updates kind of along the way are fun, and we'll have plenty of different things like that you can get plugged in. But race day is where it's at. And so if you're not near a track, you can't get there, what we do is we have an owners only text thread. You never get marketed to on this thread. It's only for race days. And it begins at, let's say, 8 a.m. And it's like, hey, gang, today's race day. As a reminder, your horse is going to, leave the starting gates at 5 p.m. here at Keeneland in Lexington, race number 5. Get ready for all the action of the day. And then, we're there live. And so we send an update from the backside, and you get to see your horse before the race. And then when your horse comes into the paddock and they're strutting their stuff, you get a little video of that. And then we show you when the rider, your jockey's getting thrown up. We'll do a little jockey interview. And then we'll do a little video walking out behind your horse through the tunnel out onto the track. And then we send you the live racing link, and you jump on and you take the ride with us. We're trying to do so that it feels like you're there, right? And then in person, just this week, we had 2 races, and they were here in Lexington. So I hosted everybody, and I think we had, probably And by the way, it was kind of like a rainy race day, both days, both Thursday and Friday. It was kind of rainy and cold. We still had probably 30 owners at the track with us. We were cheering, we were in the paddock together. There are certain parts of race day that we can't guarantee to all owners, especially, on a bigger day. Some things are limited, but regardless of the level of ownership that you have, you can always come watch your horse race. If your horse wins, you can come into the winner's circle. And as somebody who's done this for a long time, I can tell you one thing. There's nothing like cheering on your own horse in a race. Absolutely nothing. I mean, Brian and I have seen some great horse racing. We've been there for it. We've been in the suites at the Kentucky Derby. Like, we've checked the bucket list off. Man, there is nothing like watching your horse barrel down the stretch. I don't care if they're in 5th place. Like, it just, having a horse in the race, it makes all the difference in the world.
I mean, just compared to other investment types, right? Like, yeah, it's fun watching a stock go up, or it's fun watching, your real estate, I guess, value go up. But yeah, I mean, compared to a horse race, a whole nother level, like you said.
One of our colts, Country Grammar, mentioned him before in the episode. Country Grammar's taking some time off, but is getting ready to come back, hopefully for the $3 million Pegasus Cup in Miami, actually, at Gulfstream Park. And then we're hoping to send him on to kind of the Super Series in the Middle East, either the Saudi World Cup, which is $20 million, or the Dubai World Cup, which is $12 million. And so I'm an excitable guy, but I've never really been a screamer at events. This sport has made me a screamer. Full stop. I got my hand raised. I'm a screamer now. And man, when we watched Country Grammar in that race, so if you can just ride along with me for a minute, you've got Country Grammar coming down the stretch with Flavian Pratt, top rider, absolutely incredible. And you've got big money Mike Smith on a horse named Royal Ship. He's a really nice gelding from Brazil. And these two come around the turn, and it's just them. They're alone. You've got the fields behind them. It's like you've got the boys and the men are out front, and Royal Ship bumps into Country Grammar. Okay. There's two types of horses in this world. There's horses that they get bumped in and they falter and they run back, and I guess people too. And there's others that dig in and run harder. Country Grammar got bumped into, and he grit his teeth and put his ears back, and he barreled down and absolutely just fought down that stretch to grab the win at the wire. And it was out of this world exciting, and then of course we let him in. It's the Hollywood Gold Cup's a storied race. Some great racehorses have won it. It's about a $70,000 gold trophy. And it just was freaking awesome. And Brian and I were sitting there, we did an interview, and you could hear our voice across Santa Anita, and we were like, we started this business so that we could invite all of the people that are up there in the stands. They say a racehorse is the only animal in the world that can take thousands of people for a ride all at the same time. And we have found that to be especially true. We just want to update it to say, it could take millions of people for a ride at the same time.
That's amazing. I mean, to think that, somebody who's putting maybe a couple $100 can almost feel like a big time owner, at the track. And to stand there, let's say your horse wins, and to stand at the winner's circle, if that's possible, that must be the coolest feeling in the world.
Well, let me tell you. Yes, let me tell you one more quick story. This is pretty fun. So, I've always said that horses are a great equalizer, especially when you're riding them. But it's even in this case, and the beauty of it is that they say that horses are the sport of kings, and which we want to change that narrative in and of itself, but. We were up at Saratoga this year, and we were watching horses race, and I looked around me and I saw to my left, to my right, and the 4 guys sitting behind me, all billionaires. And we had a user with us who had $50 in a horse. One of the guys bet us that his horse would beat us. He bet another billionaire guy. It was like pretty funny. And the guy's like, I don't bet. And so I turned around and I said, I'll bet you $100 our horse beats your horse. And he doesn't know who I am. Like, that's the beauty. Like, I've literally seen sheiks reaching over the thing to like hug this random dude with a beer because they're just cheering on. And it's like, that's something special that you can't get anywhere else. It doesn't matter if you own a $50 share or you own, a $50 million stable, you are there, you've got the same, you've got a horse in the race, and there's one winner who gets to cross the line, and all bets are off when they leave those gates. Like, we're all the same.
In your mind, where does all of this fit in the realm of, investing versus gambling, right? Like two ends of the spectrum. Like where does Commonwealth sit in that spectrum?
I think we think of it as, within horse racing particularly, and I suppose any other sport, but particularly within horse racing, it's a companion product. I think it probably goes without saying to your guys' audience, but it is fully an equity investment. This isn't gambling at all. We're not on the gambling side of the picture, but we have a lot of long time horse players that they think of it like a mixture. They think of it like they're still going to be placing their bets because you get that immediate payment and you get that immediate feeling. But the long game of ownership and all the stuff you get to see in between, and I think a lot of what Chase was just talking about with the excitement and the feelings you get, I think a lot of it comes from being involved in between the races and seeing how hard it is and how much horsemanship goes in, and just all this, the right factors that have to come together. And you definitely don't get that with gambling. With gambling, even if you're a casual fan, you're betting on names, you're betting on strides, like you're just kind of guessing. And then the moment that race is done, you don't care about that horse anymore. You don't really care where it's going or what its next moment may be. And so with investing in ownership within horse racing, I think of them as companion products. And there's a lot of data out there that shows owners gamble on their horses. So the wagering outfits, the track operators, all those folks, they love what we're doing, and they love that we're trying to bring more people to the sport because people bet on it. So I think the industry sees them complementary, especially with our use case. And then I think even on the user level, they're pretty complementary. They're different products. One thing we always like to say is, if you're already gambling on horses, why not invest in some where your losses are tax deductible? So unless you're a professional gambler, you can't deduct your losses, where here it's capital gains, capital losses, at least in the U.S. I'm not, a tax expert anywhere really, but certainly not around the world. And, if you've got stock gains, which a lot of us do at the moment, and if you've got crypto gains or any of these things, we send you a 1099 at the end of the year, just like any other investment account would. And they're capital losses. You can use those to offset capital gains and other types of income. So again, I think it's complementary, and I think it actually opens up a lot of people's eyes to a different side of the sport.
You did a great job of, taking us through your thought process, the company and how you guys operate. And, if I can say so, it's really impressive, and you guys have done your due diligence. And I guess the last question would be, what's next for you guys? What are you looking for in the next, let's say, I don't know if you can, 6 to 12 months. And what would you say to somebody that, isn't an investor and is looking for something to kind of put their money in and let's say you have them in front of you,
What's next for Commonwealth, kind of 12, 24 out and stuff like that. We've got a number of things in mind. We're going to go deeper into horse racing, offer more products. We've certainly got trading on our horizon. I think that's a pretty natural evolution of these types of platforms. And nobody's done it in racing. And I think nobody has done it the way we would do it. I think we could use a little more liquidity and a little bit more volume, but it offers, you want to talk about gambling and investment again. I think even once you launch trading, now you have shorter timelines and stuff. And so you start to, get some of that gambling feeling as well in terms of the quick kind of dopamine hit, so to speak. So we're really just thinking, we've got 8 horses now, and we're just trying to basically nail horse racing. We think about other sports and things like that, but we have our hands full with horse racing at the moment. So 2022 will be about kind of V2 product. We're thinking about Android, trading, just kind of bulking it up. And I think there's a lot of kind of user experience stuff that we're going to be doing as well. I mentioned live racing earlier. We're going to tighten up a lot of the experience so that our app is kind of your source for all the information.
It's a great app, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've worked really hard on that. And, it's something we felt was really missing, was something that a digital native would, at Chase likes to say, a digital native would share. I mean, there's apps and then there's things that you tell your buddies about. And we wanted to be one of those. We think we've got it, but we also know we have a lot of work to do. So anyway, stuff like that. I mean, we're at the beginning of this journey. We've done a lot of cool things with our tech, but there's a lot of runway for our technology. So yeah, I think that's most of it. And then Chase, how would you, if there was a user that you were trying to sell? I would love to hear this.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that we laughed about is when we set out to do this, and I think this is probably a symptom of any kind of design process. I always like to tell people, my 86-year-old grandpa used to ride his horse to the grocery store to get bread and milk for his family. And he's now using his iPhone to buy racehorses and can do it in less than 5 minutes. That's a real badge of honor for us. I mean, that Horse Country Grammar, he sold out in less than 90 minutes this year. This summer, Brian and I opened the window for just a couple minutes. We're like, let's let a couple people in. We're going to get it tested. And it was like the floodwaters. And we were like, well, I guess we have to tell everybody. And so we sent out an email. My grandpa got a push notification. My grandpa got the push notification in his recliner. And he's probably like watching Wheel of Fortune or something, who knows. And he got in there, bought his shares. We had all these people who were up in arms because they're like, it's not fair. We didn't get in there. It wasn't easy. I'm like, hey guys, look, y'all are like 30, 40. My 86-year-old grandpa bought the shares. And so, we love that. But now we want to switch over to figuring out how do we unify the experience. So like Brian said, there's one place. The other thing is we've got a really awesome audience, and that's interesting for other businesses, for advertisers and things. And we're not going to do the lazy route of going like, okay, we're going to advertise to our users. We're like, how can we add some gamification to the experience so that, you can earn badges and things for attending races. You could win prizes. There's so much of that that's possible. And we just think makes the experience a lot more fun, right? Learning is actually really fun in this sport. One of the things that was most surprising to us, and by the way, this is true of our like younger audience, like some of our millennial audience, which I guess isn't actually the younger. I'm like, as a millennial, I guess I'm like dating myself because we're not the younger audience anymore. But let me pluck this gray hair out of the back of my neck. But one of the things that we found is they're like really interested in learning. They're like, man, it's fascinating to learn more about these horses. Because like, honestly, guys, as I always tease, I'm like, as the horse nerd here, like, I'm just kind of like, man, a lot of these people don't want to hear any more from me and from us about like learning about the horses. And people are like, no, it's fascinating. Like one of our horses is in therapy right now. And people are like, we would love to learn all about that, like the saltwater treatments, the swimming. And so that part is really interesting. So I think that as we unify that experience and we allow people to kind of get deeper, and by the way, like on their own terms, right? I think there's nothing worse than a product that forces you into having a lifestyle that you don't want. And so instead it's like, hey, we're going to make it really easy for you to be as deep in this as you want, but also to like, be hands off when you don't want to be all the way in. So I think that in trading is going to make it a lot of fun. And then we're just seeing like, we want to make the experience available and possible and the community kind of engaged outside of horse racing. Like I'm a lifelong horse guy and I don't just hang out with people at the track. I do a lot of stuff with the horse community, all of our connections, like trap shooting and having dinners and going to the bar. And so we just think that there's a space for that as well to like, live it. That's what I'm particularly excited about.
Well, you guys, this has been awesome. You guys have such a great future. You've built such a great app. And, I think your passion for this entire sport just really shines through in everything you do. So thank you for bringing this great experience to the world. And thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, guys. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Chat soon.
Thanks for tuning in. We sure hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please be sure to subscribe and give us a nice review for this podcast. It means a lot. And remember, you can find a transcription of this episode along with all past issues of our weekly newsletter at our website, alternativeassets.club. See you next time.